Hello, my name is Brendan Decora, and I want to welcome you to my podcast, Pro Audio Profiles. Here, I'm going to interview recording engineers, mixers, producers, and others in the pro audio field. Together, we're going to learn how you can make amazing records that can give your listeners goosebumps. Welcome to the show. Today, we have Isha Erskine. He's a Grammy-winning producer, engineer, and composer. He has credits with Jeff Beck, Maroon 5, Black Eyed Peas, and Ziggy Marley. Check it out. So, thank you for being here, first and foremost.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. No, it's we've known each other a long time, and it's cool to finally have you on for sure.
Thanks, Brennan. Good to be here.
So I like to start with your backstory, if you want to just share how you got to where you are, that kind of thing.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to. I started recording punk rock bands in garages when I was like 14, and I realized that was something that maybe I could do for a living, and I actually stopped doing high school at like 15. There's a proficiency exam that you can take when you're in California. Started going to local college, studied music theory and composition, and then after that I went to CRAS, the Conservatory of Recording Arts, which I think you went to as well. Is that right, Brennan?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And that was cool because like you could do a lot of studio time, you know, like after hours you could go and record stuff, and it was like if there was open sessions, you had to like pass this little test to like get the studio time, but it was always the exact same test. So once you knew the answers, you could just use it every night. And so I like spent a lot of time not sleeping and just like practicing in the studio, you know?
Right.
I also interned at a recording studio called Prairie Sun up here that recently closed down, but it had like 2 vintage Neves and an SSLG. So like even before I went to school, I had like a little bit of experience. But when you don't have that like but when you don't have like a Signo Flow class, an SSLG is confusing to like a 16-year-old kid. A lot of routing options that I didn't really get at the time. Anyway, so part of finishing CRAS is that you have to do an internship, and my internship just happened to be all one record, which was My Chemical Romance, The Black Parade. So that was kind of a neat thing to like see how a high-budget rock record is made for 3 months. And like, get food, clean the bathroom. Yeah, but also like they had 2 interns, so you got to spend half the day doing like the runner chore kind of thing, and the other half the day observing the session.
Right.
Which was pretty rad.
Awesome.
It was Rob Cavallo and Doug McKean, you know, and they had just finished producing American Idiot. It was like their very next project. So
okay. What studio was that at?
El Dorado in Burbank.
Okay. Nice.
Have you ever been over there?
I haven't, but I've heard about it for sure. Is it still around?
I don't even know.
Oh, jeez. Okay.
It's been, I mean, that was a long time ago. It was like 15 years ago. But last time I checked, it was still around. I worked there again as an engineer like 8 years later or something.
Okay, cool.
Let's see. And then the guy who is the assistant, how long should the story be, Brendan? How much detail do you want?
I mean, you can go for, 10 minutes if you want.
Okay. I'll try to move through it. So the assistant engineer that I was learning from at El Dorado used to be assistant at Ocean Way Studios. And so he kind of called over there for me. I was like, I have this good guy. Do you want to hire him as a runner? And they're like, yeah, we always need new runners. The turnover is kind of high, you know?
Right.
And so I went over there and like Ocean Way, which then became United Recording, and I think is like actually closing soon, which is kind of sad.
It actually closed recently, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the people that worked there when I worked there still work there like 15 years later, and that's partly why I left, because people would be assistant engineers there for like 10 to 15 years.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to like keep moving in my career. And and people would be runners there for like 6 years too before they became assistants. You know, it's like a very slow. the projects that you could work on were very high budget. And I think that's partly why, like, they wouldn't let any runner just fill in as an assistant when an assistant got sick or something.
Right.
So a friend of mine that I went to school with worked at Paramount Recording Studios that owned, like, American in North Hollywood and Encore in Burbank. And I think they own a lot of places now. But they were more of like the hip-hop studio. The large majority of their sessions were vocal overdub sessions, which is much different than Ocean Way. That's like huge rock band or 40-piece string section.
Yes.
So you can kind of move your way quicker because the skills required to punch vocals, even though like it's like, you know how to record like fast hip hop vocals and fly hooks and stack stuff. Like it's a skill of its own, but it's still a one mic session as opposed to a string session, you know? Exactly. Anyway, so I was able to like move up from runner to assistant there fairly quickly. But it was all hip hop, which I appreciate more now. But at the time I was like 808 beats, vocal overdubs. I just wasn't that stoked on it. So one of the engineers over there used to work at Stag Street Studios, which is like an API studio in Van Nuys. And they did mostly like rock and jazz and indie. And I was like, sweet, I can get back to real instruments instead of just recording vocals over MP3s.
Right.
And that's where I got to work with Jeff Beck. And it was just one of those situations where like the main engineer had to leave to work on another project. And like, well, you'll just finish the project. So you're Jeff Beck's engineer now, you know?
Nice.
And that was a really cool experience. And then actually I started working where I met you, which is Glenwood Place in Burbank. I took a quick little break and I did live sound at a Shakespeare festival for 3 months in Lake Tahoe. It's like working vacation. And then I got back and it was like, well, what should I do now? And I ended up getting hooked up with at Glenwood Place. And that was kind of where I like assisted for a long time. And there's a little bit of a mix of projects. And I just like slowly more and more, like more engineering gigs came my way. And like, you know, I ended up working for the Black Eyed Peas a bunch. And it's like the most money I've ever made per day. And it all started because like one of their writers came in. I was like, so who's engineering for you today? He's like, oh, I thought you could do it. And I was like, oh, I thought I was the assistant, but sure, I can do it. And then I ended up working for him for like a year, you know?
Nice. That's
like,
awesome.
And yeah, so I was doing that and starting to just like branch out and work at a bunch of different studios as like an engineer instead of an assistant. But I wasn't too big of a fan of just like living in the city and being in Los Angeles. And my wife and I wanted to have kids, so we moved up to Northern California. Now we have like property and a farm and children, and I built a studio that you see me in right now. And, you know, I mix for people all over the world, and I also like record and produce local artists and write music for television and like instrumentals for other people to write top line vocals over. And that's kind of where I'm at. That's the
awesome.
Brings us to modern day.
Nowadays, do you find yourself doing more mixing, more engineering, more production? Is there anything you kind of focus on?
It's really all over the place. Like I would say a third of my work is remote mixing, a third of my work is producing local clients, and then the other third is writing music for TV. So just like bounce around.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Well, a lot of what I like to talk about on the podcast is, you know, how to inspire the artists in the studio and how to get the best performances out of them. What can you walk us through your process for preparing an artist for a session?
Yeah, I do a lot of full records where I start at pre-production and go all the way to mixing. And sometimes if they don't have a budget for like another mastering house, I even do the mastering too. And it really starts with song selection. You know, I always encourage artists to write way more songs than they need for the project. and then I can help them choose to like whittle it down. So if they can write 20 and we can choose 10, like as many as they feel like they can get, so we can really choose the best. And you know, you hear stories like, oh, we wrote 50 songs and chose the best. A lot of people don't have like that much material to just, you know, but at least if you can have more than you need and then whittle it down, it can be really nice. And then sort of the next step is figuring out like the vision for the record, you know, what style are we going for? What kind of mood, what kind of instrumentation? And we can, before we even record anything, we can kind of imagine where we want the songs to go, you know? Are the drums real? Are they electronic? Are they sticks, brushes? That informs a lot about where the song is going to go. Or even if there is drums, right? It could just be acoustic and piano and vocals or something.
Right.
Yeah, and then I also hope artists choose like the key of the song that works best for their voice, because a lot of people will write on like their instrument, like guitar, but you know, really we should like capo it up or make it so that they can sing it easily without strain, you know. People write songs they can't sing good all the time. Just it's very strange. But there's often a better place. And it's the same thing with tempo. It's like there'll be, if you there, you know, tempo is such a big deal. Like if a song is too slow, it feels dragging and like it never gets to the point. If it's too fast, the words are like jumbled and rushed together. And like this is just the difference between like 2 and 4 BPM. It makes all the difference, you know, just a little. So we work on that. And that's like, then we're ready to actually start recording an album, you know?
Right. And how do you create an environment in the studio that encourages them to be creative and confident?
Well, I try, you know, producing is almost like a band therapist or like the therapist for the artist, because a lot of people don't have that much confidence. Or sometimes they have too much confidence and they don't realize they need to go back and fix things. So you have like two sort of camps. So there's like the artist who is self-doubtful but very talented that you have to like encourage, like, you're doing amazing, you sound so great, let's do a couple more takes and then we'll cut it together. And you know, vocals is really where a lot of those like emotions come out of like, am I good enough, like, you know?
Right.
And so like really trying to encourage them and like believe in themselves. And sometimes you have to encourage them to like try things in a different way that they normally wouldn't do. And they'll be like timid, but you like, so sometimes it's like tough love. It's like, you can do this, just try it. Stop like giving up, you know? Sometimes you have to really push people.
Right.
And then there's the other camp of people that like think they're great, but don't hear the small imperfections, whether it's like pitch or timing of guitar strum, whatever it is, or like, you know, finger noises that are just too loud and they need to like move their hand up when they change chords and stuff. And then that's like, that's almost a weirder situation, because you have to be like, well, my name is going to be on this too, and I really want to make sure this is good. And sometimes you literally have people like, oh, don't worry, this is just demo purposes, I won't put your name on it. That's like a weird situation to be in, because you're like, I'm working on this, and you're paying me like a multi-platinum Grammy engineer, but you don't want it to be like professional sounding. It's hard for me to sort of wrap my head around, but it happens.
Crazy. That's crazy. Yeah. So how do you manage your own energy and mindset to stay inspired and motivated over long sessions?
So part of it is that like I've really tried to establish a work-life balance. You know, I know that when we were both working together in LA, 12, 15-hour days were not uncommon. I work like 6 hours a day now, and I think that's like the perfect max for me, you know? I have like time in the morning for exercise, time in the afternoon to like hang out or work in the garden, be with my kids and family. So that's a big part of it. And then also like writing my own music helps keep me inspired, you know, is like, or just being creative. Like if you're only doing like editing or like recording the same thing over and over again, it can get kind of stale. But if like if you're putting your input in or like picking up an instrument to add to a song, it's just more fun. So that helps me stay motivated and involved.
Now, same with the hours for me. Like I've been doing a lot more mixing lately, and I've, only working 6, maybe 8 hours at most in a day, you know, and I actually did a tracking session recently for like a week at a big studio, and back to 12 hours all of a sudden, and it like totally kicked my ass. Like I didn't know how to do it anymore.
For that now.
It's like, Jesus, this is crazy.
Yeah.
So
I don't do like caffeine or anything, but I would probably have to if I was going to go back to like a 12-hour day.
Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So how have you evolved your technique and style over the years? Has that changed?
Yeah, I mean, this was actually, I know, because I've listened to your show, that you talk about like someone who really influences you,
Yes.
And like that kind of informs this question. So we could maybe just jump to that if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, we could jump to that. I mean, basically, one of the few questions that are always the same is, what has been your biggest teacher? And obviously, it can tie into how things have evolved in your technique as well. So, if you want to go from there, for sure.
Yeah, so it's interesting because the person who comes to mind with that question is Mike Shipley, who I would have ended up working for if you hadn't sort of like moved on from that session and passed it on to me.
Right.
Which touches on another little thing about learning, is that like even the most chill people don't always get along. And like learning in this industry that like you might not be able to work with everybody because your personalities and your communication just doesn't totally align. Mm-hmm. So that happened for you, and then it became a great opportunity for me. And the main thing I learned from Mike Shipley, and for those who don't know, he was like Mutt Lange's engineer. He worked on Shania Twain, Def Leppard, Queen. What else? I mean, tons of stuff. But what he taught me when I went to school, it was like, use subtractive EQ, try to like document the recording without changing it too much. Right. And then I worked with Mike Shipley, and it was just like, crank it, like make everything as big and huge as possible. Right. And that's been my like modus operandi ever since then. It was just like, I want stuff to sound as epic as it possibly can, Yeah,
definitely.
And like, no fear if the kick drum needs 16 dB of 80 hertz, do it.
That's honestly a good point, because there's a lot of times where I've told people like, don't look at the settings of the gear. If it sounds good, it's good. Like, it may need 16 dB on the kick drum. Like, who cares? No one's going to see those settings when they're listening to it. They're going to feel it sounds good, so it's all good.
It's partly why with even all these new like mixing EQs, like that really show you your curve and stuff, I still like all the EQs that are modeled off of all the old gear, because you just turn the knob until it sounds good. For whatever reason, if I see a graphic EQ doing this kind of thing, it makes me think, oh, that looks really extreme. Maybe I should back that off. And I have to like, no, it's fine. It's fine. It sounds good.
Yep, exactly. So what do you wish more artists knew before coming into the studio?
That it can take time to make it right. I feel like some people have an unrealistic expectation of how quickly a song can be put together. Yeah. And it's also very style dependent too. Like if someone wants to record an acoustic and vocal song and those are the only elements, it is possible to do in 2 to 4 hours, Right. But if you're going to layer harmonies and double vocals or have a bunch of keyboards or whatever, it can be like a very multiple day process, And I think a lot of people think, oh, we just go in and play the song, like people who are unexperienced. And the product seems to turn out so much better most of the time if you can focus on each instrument and make each instrument the best it can be. You know, and that is genre specific. Like if you're recording a jazz record, that's a whole different, that's when you go back to the documentary style. You're like documenting the live music that they're making. But if you're producing a modern record, everything needs its like tender loving care, you know?
Right. For sure. So when you're mixing, how do you maintain your objectivity when you're deep into a session?
I think working quickly is the best way to not get like stuck on something.
Yeah.
And that was another thing that I learned from Mike Shipley is that like he would have pretty much the final mix in 2 to 3 hours, even on a song that had hundreds of tracks.
Right.
Because you just like keep adding it in and keep balancing and just keep going. And then, of course, references are very helpful. Like, if you feel like you've lost sight of the goal, if you've already had songs approved by the artist, you can just, like, reference a past song's vocal level or something. Because vocal level is so subjective. And after you listen to a song for an hour, you might be like, this is great. But then compared to another song, it's actually just, like, a little too hot. But with a lead vocal, that 1-2 dB thing is very important.
Right, right.
So it's helpful.
And what do you wish more artists understood about the mixing process? Similar to the earlier question.
I think that most of my clients, thankfully, are quite good. But occasionally I will get clients that think the idea of mix revisions is strange and like the first mix should be exactly what they pictured in their head.
Yes.
And they're like, how do you expect me to give you revisions? I'm like, and then we like work through what they actually want, like on a Zoom call or on the phone.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I wanted the lead vocal down 0.5 dB and the kick drum up like 1 dB and the background's down slightly. And that was like it. Like they barely even wanted any changes, but they just think it should be perfect right away. So that's a weird thing. Like I do a lot of like package mix rates where there's like 2 rounds of revisions included. And then like, if they want to keep going, they pay a little extra. And like most mixes are good in 2 revisions, you know, it's like the first round is maybe some rougher movements. And then the second round is like those tiny 0.5 dB adjustments in like a couple little places.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah.
And
there is one more side of that, actually. Can I touch one more thing on that?
Of course.
Is that some people think they can deliver really bad recordings and have the mixing fix everything and have it suddenly sound like a professional record. And it's like, I can make it better, but I can't take it to 100%.
Yes. No, I definitely agree with that. There's been quite a few clients I get where, you know, they'll have these terrible recordings and send me like, you know, these incredible references where the artist spent 3 years in the studio. It's like, well, I can't quite do that, you know, but so for sure.
Thankfully, drum samples are really good, but like bad guitar sounds that are committed and you don't have like a DI to redo it.
Yeah.
Very hard.
You can only do so much. Yeah.
You're like, that sounds like an early 90s pods, like, amp sim. It's just like so awful, and there's very little you can do about it.
Yeah, exactly. So how has the music industry changed since you first started, and how have you adapted to that?
Well, it seems like budgets just keep getting smaller and smaller. The ability to make money as an artist is much more difficult. So it's harder for artists to want to spend a bunch of money when they're like starting out because they know they're not going to sell any CDs, you know? And then the other thing that's really changed is like how much social media plays into the music industry. So like a lot of my clients will be doing like content creation in the studio. You know what I mean?
Right.
And it's like, that's why I'm nicely lit right now, is because clients come in and they're like, we need to make a little video. Like, so that they can release something all the time, because that's how you like stay relevant right now. Right.
And how do you help artists stay focused and motivated through a long session? I know we talked about how you do it, but how do you help the artist do it?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is I try not to do long sessions. So, like, my studio is only open for 6 hours a day, and a lot of people just book 4 hours if it's like vocals or something. Okay. So that helps a lot. But also, we have a little tea station. So, like, having a little tea break can be nice. Or, like, we have a farm here, so you can, like, walk around and visit the animals, or, like, pick during the summer, like, pick fresh fruit out of the garden or something. That can be nice. Yeah, I mean, what else? I do find that sometimes if you have like you're working with multiple people, like a couple guitar players in the band are here or something, they'll start some like side conversation that's like not related to the song, and sometimes you just have to be like, "Hey guys, let's get back to work." Like, let's keep moving, you know? Yeah, because I like to make progress, and just like sitting around waiting seems silly, you know?
And in your opinion, what makes a great recording or mix?
So I think those are, I mean, I guess it's similar, but I'll address the mix one first. I feel like for me, a great mix is when you can listen to it and you don't hear anything you want to change. Then you know you're done. Right. You know, that's what makes a great mix. Like, if it just sounds like you're happy with it. Like, and it's weird because I like listen to other people's records and I still go to either critique them or I'm just like, oh, this sounds great, you know? And I'm sure like you could change tiny things, but like it sounds good, you know?
Right. Along the same vein, what distinguishes a good mix from a great one?
Depth, I think, and dynamics. You know,
a
lot of mixes are just like loud and slammed the whole time. And I think you lose some emotionality to that. But if like the chorus is hit hard and it's not necessarily just the mix, it's the arrangement of the song, you know?
Yes.
And that kind of relates back to the recording thing is like, if you have all the elements in all the time, the song doesn't go anywhere. But if the verses are smaller and the choruses are bigger and the last chorus is huge, that feels so much better. Or like the arrangement of like just the little like 1-bar transition of how you get into the chorus. Is there a little breath there, a little space, a little swell transition? Those make such a difference than just, everyone's still playing, and maybe there was a tiny drum fill, and now we're in the chorus.
Yeah,
it makes it sound super flat. So I really like songs that like have dynamics and then grow. And you know, if you get a song that doesn't have those built into the arrangement, like filtering and stuff can be you can like make stuff sound smaller during the verse and then make it full range. You know,
exactly.
A really good example of that is like the intro to Green Day American Idiot. It's like telephone and then giant, you know?
Exactly.
And like doing that kind of stuff can help.
Yeah, I'm actually glad you touched on that. Like I have, you know, I run into the same thing a lot, and it's like as a mixer, it's like, yeah, I try to mix, you know, the tracks that were given to me, but at the same time when everything is on all the time, it's like, how do you show that there's a chorus happening? Or, you know, even I was doing a track recently where there's like 3 soloists playing all on the same licks at the same time. So it's like, okay, which one do you want to feature here? Because having them all, it just sounds muddy, you know? So a lot of it really is the arrangement, you know?
Yeah, the arrangement stuff is so important. Like, if you have a vocal and then there's like sort of an answer background guitar and they actually find the rhythms that work against each other, it's pretty cool. But if they're playing at the exact same time, you have to like automate down whichever one is not the feature, or you use like some sort of ducking compressor or something.
Yeah, that's exactly what I had to do was automate.
Yeah, you can't. You can only have one thing in the forefront, really. You know. And then you can have like the little bit behind, and then like the deep back, and we talked about depth. Like, I feel like one of the things that I really like to do when I'm mixing is have like shorter reverbs for the things that are more present, and then like longer like hall style reverbs or whatever for things you want to wash out and put in the back. And I feel like that kind of stuff really helps you have like a sense of space and like forefront versus background.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And how do you keep yourself updated with new technologies and techniques?
You know, a lot of the modern like software stuff is like subscription based. So like when I get the new update that just comes with it, I'll like watch the little tutorial and I'll be like, oh, cool. This is how you do this new technique. And like there's been great advancements in Pro Tools lately with like, we talked, I think before the recording started, about like Pro Tools Audio Bridge, which, you know, is allowing me to send this audio through Pro Tools to a video call.
Yeah.
And it's a little old now, but some big things for me as a composer is like freezing tracks that require a ton of CPU, like RAM, heavy sample libraries, and then also being able to bounce offline has made it so like printing stems is so much faster.
Right.
You know? And I was just doing this thing today where I needed to print stems, and I've learned that like the less things are going on in the session, the faster it prints out, right? Because you don't have as much going on. Yeah. So I'll like print the drum stem, and then I'll do a save as or whatever, but then I'll deactivate all the drums before I print the bass stem. And then it prints out faster, and then I deactivate the bass drum and then print the guitar. And it's like, by the end, it's like super fast, you know? Nice. It saves so much time. But it is interesting, like, are you doing Atmos or anything, Brendan?
I have, I'm doing Atmos now,
Your studio's set up for that? Yeah, I feel like that's something like, I'm kind of old school with that. I don't know if I'll dive into it ever. Like, I don't know if it's worth the investment for my market.
Right. So the reason why I do Atmos is, you know, I've realized that for the consumer, if the consumer has AirPods and an iPhone and Apple Music, that's the default setting is Atmos. That's the first thing they hear. They don't hear the stereo version. You have to go and manually turn it off. And if you do a mix that's got your name on it, and then the consumer hears the Atmos version that someone else did that may or may not have butchered it, it's like, you know, I just wanted more control and to be able to do it all if I needed to, you know. So that's the main reason. And honestly, it's fun. Like, I've always been into surround sound, and that, you know, it's basically surround sound with height speakers. So it's cool to pan stuff around. And I even did a mix that was like really like atmospheric and crazy, where I had a lot of like slapback delay on the vocal for added ambience, and I put the delay in the back and had stuff flying around, and it was really fun. You know, it's cool. Nice. So,
do you have a special monitor controller for that?
Yeah, that's actually why I got the Apogee Symphony, is because they have a feature basically where you can link all the outputs and use the Symphony as a monitor controller. Oh, so nice. that was one of the cheaper ways. Like, yes, you can get crazy monitor controllers that do Atmos, but, you know, I didn't want to spend a ton of money, and so I was looking for a way to do it that was more affordable. So, you know, I just went that route. But yeah. So when you're mixing, what is your process when you first receive a track to mix?
It depends if they followed my instructions for file delivery or not.
Fair. That's true.
So I have fairly specific file delivery requirements, which are pretty, well, it depends. If it's coming from Pro Tools, I don't really ask that much. Right. But if it's coming from another DAW, like, I like to be able to import the audio files and have them in some sort of sensical order, like drums and then bass and then guitar, just like it's been since, you know, 24-track tape machines, like just some normal order. Otherwise, you have to figure stuff out, or like audio 1, 2, 3, like that. It can get really bad. But but let's say I'm ready to actually start because I have good files. Like, the first thing I do is sort of like route things into my template that I have, you know, like drums go to the drum bus and all that kind of stuff. And then I just usually if a song has drums, I just start mixing the drums. I have like level targets that I try to hit with my kick and snare that help me sort of like have the right headroom as I layer everything else, and just keep going through and keep listening till I hear no problems, you know.
I just want to take a quick break and tell you about my free guide detailing my techniques for recording huge snare sounds. Check it out now at brandondecora.com/huge snare. And now back to the show. And then one of the biggest things for me is like talking to the clients and learning about A, how much they like their ref mix, and B, what the references are and how close they want me to get to the references. How do you work with your clients with that?
Yeah, I always ask, like, if you have references of like a drum tone you really like, or like vocal effects that you really like, because some people like so much washed out reverb, you know, stuff, and other people want like very dry personal vocals. So it's nice to hear the vision of where they want that stuff. And if I get that, I try to like reference it while I'm mixing. Sometimes people just say, do your thing, man. Like, you know how music should sound more than I do. And then I can just, you know, follow my instincts with it. And we tweak it in the revisions. Right.
I honestly have the hardest time when people tell me to do my thing because
you don't know what your thing is?
Well, no, it's because mixing is infinite. You know, you can go in any direction you want. Yeah. So it's like, well, what do you like, so that I know at least I can go somewhere in that direction. Otherwise, I could make it totally like dirty and distorted and messed up. And then they're like, what happened? This is totally wrong, you know? So it's hard for me when people say that, you know. Sometimes it's kind of informed by the genre, though. Like, you have a fairly good idea of like what it's supposed to sound like. So that can be helpful. But yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, you can go down the wrong path by doing that, and then have a client who's not happy. And like, I produce songs, like full instrumentals for clients, and the same kind of thing can happen. If they don't give me a direction, I might go somewhere else with the song. So I really try to get references, and then you can like nail it, you know, like similar tempo, similar instrumentation, but just your own chords and melody, and you know. Right. Nice. So it's really nice to have a focus and a direction. Yeah, definitely. And what's your process for making a mix translate well across different playback systems? I think that the most important thing with that is just really knowing what your room sounds like, and hopefully having a treated room that like does sound pretty accurate, you know? Like before I built this studio and I was doing more of like a bedroom mixing kind of thing, you would kind of need to like take your mix in different places. You know, people talk about the old car test and that kind of stuff. Right. But now, like, I know so much of like how this room translates. Like, I can just make it sound good to my ears, and then for the most part, it works everywhere else. Right. Every once in a while, I use this app called Mix Checker. Have you heard of that? I have heard of it. I haven't used it before. It like emulates. It like takes your full range mix and applies a filter to make it sound like it's coming out of a laptop speaker or an iPhone or like earbuds or whatever. So you can basically kind of be like, how is this going to sound on the crappiest speakers you can get, you know? Right. And the other thing that comes up a lot is with modern music, pop music, hip hop and stuff, is like they want these huge 808s that are like often frequencies that small speakers just don't reproduce. Right. And the only way you're going to hear those on small speakers if you generate higher harmonic content through like saturation and distortion and stuff. And so, like, sometimes you just have to make that stuff sound so gnarly so that it still cuts through on you know, people be like, I want to hear those 808s bump on my iPhone. It's like quarter-inch speaker, you know? So that is another thing. Like, low end is always the trickiest when it comes to mixes translating, you know? Yeah, absolutely. And so, like, if I'm
it doesn't happen as often anymore, but it used to be like people would bring me in to mix on an SSL, you know?
Right.
And it would be a different room that I wasn't that familiar with. So I would always listen to this one reference song, which is silly because it's like Flow Rider Good Feeling, or I think that's what it's called.
Okay.
But it has like the most awesome, like tight, subby low end. That's like as big as it should possibly be, without sounding overblown and muddy or like too much. So if I listen to that and it sounds good, and a lot of times you can like dial in the sub volume at the studio. So if you just make that song sound right, I'm like, okay, now I'm comfortable and I can just do my thing.
Nice. Yeah, I actually got a sub a while back for that reason, because I was doing projects, and then I was actually a project that I had done my own production on with my one of the projects I'm doing, and you know, I got a chance to hear it in another studio with a massive sub on there, and I was like, oh my god, this mix is all messed up because I didn't have a sub and I couldn't hear what was going on.
Too much low end,
way too much, like under 50, you know. I was like, oh geez, it's all wrong. So I
you have to have a sub,
and
you need good bass traps to really hear what's going on down there.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
And like really find your sweet spot. Like I'm in the sweet spot, but if you sit on my couch in the back of the room, that's a party.
Exactly. As always, every studio is like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
It just is what it is.
Right.
Can I ask you what sub you decided to get?
I got the Focal one that kind of matches these speakers. I really like it because you can plug a foot switch into it and then turn it on and off.
Yeah. I have that set up too.
Yeah.
And it just reminds me of how small music sounds without a sub.
Yes, exactly.
Like, this is really not very exciting when you don't. And do you have a crossover choice on your?
Yeah. On the sub there, you can adjust it. And that when you hit the foot switch and turn it off, it bypasses the crossover and makes it full range and all that. So
What frequency do you have yours set to?
I don't even remember. It probably 80.
That's where mine is. Yeah. 80 seemed like it was the sweet spot for it to.
Right.
Yeah. It is interesting. Exactly. It like, you know how a lot of times mastering engineers will like mono the bass frequencies.
Yeah.
As like one of the techniques. But when you have a mono sub, which is actually the case for most home systems too, like a hi-fi TV stereo setup or something, it does that automatically. Yes. And so like, I don't actually know what stereo subs would, like stereo bass would sound like. So every once in a while I will like bypass that sub and then like sort of check like the low end stereo-ness, because there's like multi-band stereo software where you can like widen or narrow the low end band.
Right.
And I don't know. It's just I don't know where I'm going with that.
I like to kind of wrap up, I mean, with the same questions you've kind of answered, but also if you want to talk about any current or recent projects you can talk about.
I'm producing this record, this artist named Rayleigh Forrest, where I'm writing all the like music and they're singing, so that's a lot of fun. And they're rolling out like a single every month, and it's sort of like modern pop music, but some of it is a little more guitar oriented. Modern rock music seems to be electronic music with guitars. That's kind of strange, but and then what else am I working on right now? I just finished a bunch of records. You know, this sort of like cycle that you go through when you run a music business is like, I was like busy producing 3 records for the past year, and then they're all being released now. And I'm like, okay, I need to like go back to the advertising and find my new people. And like, I just had a new client here yesterday and they're starting to book time. And I have another meeting actually later this afternoon with a brand new client. And so I'm sort of like, new things on the horizon, but
nice. Cool.
Yeah.
And you already kind of answered the most influential teacher question, but is there anyone else you wanted to talk about? I mean, it doesn't have to be just one.
Yeah. Let's see. Let me think about this for a second. Nothing's coming to mind.
No? Okay. I mean, Mike Shipley's pretty amazing, so all good.
Yeah. I mean, there's one other thing that comes to mind, which is one of the Black Eyed Peas writers. His name is Ryan, and I'm blanking on his last name right now. But I was asking him like how he approached creating a beat for pop artists and the Black Eyed Peas and stuff, and he just said, "I try to make every production I make be the most epic thing I've ever done yet." and I took that to heart, kind of, you know.
Nice.
It's just like,
that's awesome.
Just make it as cool and as big and as amazing as possible.
Right.
You can always mute stuff later, you know.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
Yeah.
Nice.
That's another big philosophy for me.
Yeah. Awesome. And you also kind of answered the reference track thing, but if there's any other tracks you listen to when you go to new studios, what do you
That's
put
the
on?
one, man. Flow Rider, Good Feeling.
Okay.
Listen to the bridge on that song and you'll hear like just amazing sort of sub bass wobble stuff. And it's like a lot of the song is like 4 on the floor, but it's just like the low end is so huge, but so tight, you know?
Right. Nice.
Which, you know, like quick little mix tip if anyone is watching this is interested, but like if you have like a really hard high pass filter, but then it has like this little resonant bump where you want it to be fat, like that is such a key to like fat but tight low end.
Right.
So I'm sure you use that all the time, but not everybody knows to do that.
Totally. That's cool. I honestly, I really just have one reference track as well, you know, like I sometimes will put on some other things, but for the most part it's just this one song by this Australian band Carnival, you know, that just has a lot of low end and, you know, big differences between the verse and the chorus, and it's full range, and I'm just so familiar with it that that's all I need pretty much, you know.
Yeah, it doesn't take long to get your ears tuned to a space, you know.
Exactly.
Our brains have a way of just figuring it out.
Right. And the last question, what would be one tidbit for an upcoming engineer?
Start right away. And just keep doing it. You're not going to be good at first, you know? Right. It takes so long to tune the ears to hear these subtle changes. Yes. Like I always remember when I first started working for clients and I was assistant engineering and stuff, and people would say like, "Oh, can you adjust that a half dB down?" And I'd be like, "I don't hear any difference. A half decibel? What a joke." Right. And, you know, and I could hear like 2 or 3 dBs or something. Yeah. But slowly over time, like a half dB on the lead vocal or something is kind of a big deal to me. You know? Is.
Yeah.
Like definitely. There is a sweet spot, and like, you know, within 1 dB, half dB, like that's where it should live. And so just like keep doing it and keep listening, and get yourself one of those like frequency instrument charts that kind of shows you like kick drum, you know, and just start memorizing those frequencies. Like kick drums, good frequencies are the low end's here and the attack is here, and it goes through every instrument. And those will all become second nature. But at first, it's just like, I don't even know how to EQ. There's so many frequencies, and I don't really know what they do.
Right.
So that's super helpful, you know, at first.
Awesome. Yeah. Cool, man. Well, it's great having you on the show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man. So nice to catch up with you.
Thanks so much for listening to the show. As you know, I'm just getting this started, and I'd love your feedback on how I'm doing, if I should keep this going, what your thoughts are. Feel free to visit proaudioprofiles.com and send me a message. Until next time.